Okay, hello everyone. Hello. And being that we are just right before Purim, I could already say Happy Purim to everyone. Tomorrow morning begins what's called the Fast of Esther, which I shall soon explain. So as such, we titled the class The Enigmatic Esther. Esther, of course, is the heroine of the story of Purim, as we shall read this Saturday night and Sunday, which is the holiday of Purim. The story of the Megilah. The Megilah of Purim is called Megillah Esther, her namesake. So though Mordechai, her uncle or cousin, was also a key component in the story, but Esther becomes the eternal name associated with the Purim miracle. So using Esther as call it an archetype, we shall discuss her message and her lesson to all of us in our lives. As I always focus on in this class is the relevance, the personal relevance, and the personal message that is contained in all the stories and characters of the Torah, messages that are relevant to us in our emotional, psychological, and spiritual lives. The reason we call it Enigmatic Esther is because, let's begin from the beginning. Esther, the name, actually has a root. The Talmud says, where do we know Esther from the Torah? Where in the Torah is hinted the name Esther? So it says in the book of Deuteronomy, there's a verse that says, "V'anochi haster astir as panei," that I, God, have concealed and hidden my face twice. Haster, astir. And hence Esther comes from the word haster, concealment. But not just one concealment, actually a double concealment, which we shall also discuss. And it's very consistent with the story of the Megilah of Purim, because if you look in the Megilah, the story, you'll never find the name of God mentioned in the entire book. And one of the reasons for that is because the hand of God is hidden and concealed in the story. There are times where you find outright miracles, outright events that are very obviously miraculous or obviously obviously suspend the laws of nature. But as we shall soon discuss, the greatest miracles of all are the ones that work behind the scenes, where the choreography changes behind the scenes, but on the surface level it doesn't seem like there's been any change. And that, of course, is the most powerful, because that's really the hand of God that is concealed, and hence God's name is not mentioned anywhere. So Esther, concealment, is very consistent with the entire story of the Megilah of Purim. Now, the story goes, most of you are familiar with it, but I'll nevertheless just sum it up. The story actually of the Megilah that we read spans over a period of 9 years. It didn't happen overnight. And during these 9 years, the Megilah tells the story of an event that actually saved the entire Jewish people. So it was almost no different than the time of the Nazis. There was a decree that called for the destruction of all the Jews. And the Persian Empire, which was then in control, Ahasuerus, the king of the Persian Empire, was the dominant superpower, as the Megillah opens up, of King Ahasuerus, who ruled and governed over 127 nations. Mahidu Vat Kush, which means from India all the way to Ethiopia, which was the central location in those years. We're talking close to 3,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, to be more precise, 2,400 years ago. The Persian Empire, that was the superpower. That's where the dominant civilization, at least in the Western world, was, and that was from India all the way to Africa. That's what King Ahasuerus ruled over. And all the Jews that existed on earth lived in that kingdom, in those countries, one of those 127 nations, countries. So Medinas, as it's called. And so the story begins with exactly that. King Ahasuerus is the supreme ruler of these countries. He throws a party. That's how the story begins. It actually tells us all the details of the party. It tells us all the lavish vessels and foods and wines and entertainment that Ahasuerus put up as the king of this great kingdom. And then the story continues that Ahasuerus became drunk, and as such summoned his wife wanted to show her off. Some say he wanted her to show off in her nudity. She refused because she considered herself royalty. As a matter of fact, it was he that married up. She was the daughter or granddaughter of the previous Babylonian and Persian emperor. So she refused, and embarrassing her that way in public, incited the king, and he consulted with his ministers, and finally decided to kill her. To kill her and execute her as an example to show how women have to be obedient to their husbands. So you have right there the whole story of men and women right there in Megillah as well. And that's what happens. He has her killed. But then, of course, he regrets it. Too late. So it begins a big search, a great search for finding the king a new bride, a new queen. And this is also described in detail. And the story continues how finally, after a great search, the king falls in love with Esther. This is where Esther appears, and she did not expose who she was as a Jewess. She just was one of the most beautiful women in the kingdom, and Achashverosh chooses her as his new queen. The story continues. As I said, all this happens not quickly. This happens over a period of years, 9 years totally. And suddenly there's another part of the story where there's a plot against the king. Two foreign ministers, two foreign conspirators decide they want to kill the king. Bigsan and Serge and Mordechai, who was a Jew, a scholar, a sage, and a minister in the king's palace, overhears it because he was also familiar with foreign languages, and he overhears the plot, and he turns them in, and they foils the plot against the king. As I said, all these are random events seemingly that, as we connect the dots, will emerge into a miracle. I'm just giving you the highlights that will be read. As I said, we read this in the Megillah. I'm giving you the Megillah, the summary of the Megillah. Then the story continues that Haman was another leader and minister in the king's palace, and he kept on growing, became the number 2 leader in the chain of command, to the point that all the people, all the kingdom were commanded to worship and bow to Haman. Everyone would bow to him except one man, Mordechai. Mordechai refused to bow, which of course incited Haman terribly, and finally he decided, just like Hitler, who also began within 8 years later, decided that he wants to destroy all these Jews, and he comes to the king and says, you have among you a nation, one nation that's spread among your nation, but their religion is different than everyone else. They're nonconformists. They don't adhere to the same customs that we do. And he basically convinces the king to decree that all the Jews in the kingdom should be killed. This, of course, creates a terrible moment, because we're talking about the entire Jewish people. And the story continues how Mordechai prays, and Mordechai now tells Esther, this is now your turn. And he tells her the famous words, were not for this reason that you became queen. And he basically encourages her to use her position to tell the king of what's going on, especially being that she's Jewish herself. So she throws a party. While Haman is plotting the overthrowing of the king, she throws a party, invites Haman to the party and the king, and he's all happy because he's being brought closer into the kingdom. And then suddenly the story turns, where it says, one night the king has insomnia, cannot sleep. His sleep is disturbed. And as a result, the king, to calm him down, he calls some of his assistants to read for him. And they read the chronicles, the journal that was held that documented all the events that happened in this kingdom. And as much as they refused, the page kept turning to a page that talks about that plot where Mordechai reversed and foiled the plot against the king, against the conspiracy against the king. When the king hears the story, he reminds himself what happened several years ago, and he calls Haman in and says, what do you do to a man that saved the king's life, the man that has found favor in the king? And Haman was convinced the king was talking about him. So he said, what you do, you put him on the king's horse, you dress him in the king's garments, and you have someone, a minister, walk him through the streets of Shushan, which was the capital of the kingdom Shushan in Persia, old ancient Persia, and announce, here's what is done to a man, give him the glory and honor to a man that has found favor in the king's eyes. And the more he elaborates, the more the king says, that's a great idea, and do exactly what you just told me with Mordechai, which of course throws Haman into a hysteria. Mordechai is his arch enemy, and here the king is telling him to do exactly that. And that's what he does. Haman, in his embarrassed and humiliation, is walking Mordechai in the king's horse, the king's garments, through the streets, announcing that this is what the king does for someone who finds his favor. Meanwhile, Esther calls the second party, and here finally she comes and tells the king, there's a man that's close to you that has chosen to kill an entire nation, including me. At this point, Achashverosh's heart was soft to his queen, and he says, who is this man? So she says, Haman. And then the story continues, how this turns over, and he finally ends up hanging Haman on the same gallows that he was about to hang Mordechai. And the whole episode turns over. It's called V'napachu, transformed from a day of mourning, it becomes a day of joy. And this becomes Purim. And then the Megillah continues and ends with a story that the following year they began to celebrate and designated this holiday for generations to come. And hence we celebrate and honor Purim every year on the 14th of Adar in Jerusalem and in other cities that are walled from those days. On the 15th of Adar, this year Sunday and Monday, and we honor it with the holiday of Purim. Purim actually means a word in Persian. In Persian means girdle. Girdle means a lottery, because it refers to the lots that Haman threw to designate what day should they destroy all the Jews, and it fell on that day. So therefore the day is called Purim. And it's a day that transformed from genocide, it became a great day of celebration. Now, as I said, many of you may know the story, but there are many lessons within the story that are far deeper than appears and it meets the eye, naked eye, and I will discuss some of them, especially those that I have not discussed in previous years. But it goes back to what I began this class with the words that Esther comes from the word concealment. And as I said, the entire Megillah, you never find the name of God, not once. It's the only book in the whole Torah the name of God is never mentioned. Because the hand of God is concealed behind the scenes. Because what I just related, the entire episode, if you were living during those times, it was a period of 9 years, you would not even notice that anything special was happening. Here the king happens to have a party, he happens to go summon his wife, Vashti, she falls out of favor, he happens to kill her, then he happens to find a new queen, her name happens to be Esther, there happens to be a conspiracy, Mordechai overturns it, the king happens to have insomnia. One of these things did not happen, and the whole story would never have taken place. Over 9 years, if you're living there, you would never connect the dots. But in retrospect, when we look at it now with a bird's eye view, you see there are dots that are connected, and it all leads to not just a happy ending, a miraculous ending. So one has to wonder, and we'll begin the first simple lesson is, what kind of hidden hand and choreography is driving our own lives? We live in the moment. What do we really know? What do we know about the moments of our lives? When you're living there on the ground level, you can't really see the picture. Often, years later, we discover that I met someone somewhere at a certain point, and how that may have changed my life. As Kierkegaard writes, he says, we all live our life frontwards, but we could only understand it backwards. In other words, when you're at the end, you can look back and see the dots. So, many of the things that we complain about, many of the things we celebrate, those dots that seem to be either not positive things in our lives, or very positive things that many mysterious elements in our lives, in fact, can really be a hidden choreography, like Hester, hidden, and we're just hidden from our eyes. So one of the key messages of Purim is looking for the dots in our lives, because the dots in your life actually can tell you what your mission in life is, can tell you what your strengths are, what challenges have come your way, what your obligation, your responsibility, your calling. How else do we discover our calling if we don't look at and study, as I said, the coordinates of our lives? So the first message of Purim is to recognize that there's always a hidden hand, there's always an invisible hand behind the scenes, even if we don't see it. And it affects everything. It's called what we call hashgacha pratis, divine providence. Baal Shem Tov puts it this way, that every detail of life is choreographed, down to even how a leaf turns in the wind. A leaf in the wind, one little leaf. Now, how many leaves are there on this earth, and how many winds, and how many trees? And take into account all the details, literally billions, if not trillions and trillions of details. And all of it is the choreography of our personal life journey. So we could, even backwards, it's hard sometimes to see. Right now, living our lives, to see all the events that happened yesterday, before yesterday, the years before, all the way back to the beginning or early stages of our lives, not always to really able to see this bigger story. Especially, we are subjective, we've been impacted by it, so it's not easy to always understand the objective picture. And we have our own distortions and our subjectivity and our own biases and so on. However, there is such a story, and if we're able to identify some key elements, it can actually help transform how we live our lives, how we plan for the future, and how we anticipate even things that we may not know are coming, that we have a certain sense, and also a certain, embracing the mystique and embracing the mystery of life and existence. Because that's a big part of it. We live in a world where we're taught, or we're convinced, that the only way to really control our lives is to be in control, is to buy, to acquire, to control things. The truth is, everything that's real in life is not in our control. Things like the truth, things like happiness, love, God, soul, anything that has reality to it, that is eternal, you'll find is not in your control, because you can't buy it. You can't control what will allow it to come your way or not. What you can control is make sure that you don't have blocks and impediments that don't allow it to emerge in your life. And the fact is, we end up being our own worst enemy, precisely because we don't always embrace that mystique of life and embrace it in a way where there is a certain magic that emerges, an enchantment that emerges, not based on our own planning. The expression in Yiddish, they say, a mensch tracht and Gott lacht. A person thinks and God laughs. In Yiddish it rhymes. It means we make our plans, and sometimes our plans don't always work out. And some people go ballistic when their plan doesn't work out, because they need control. But the people who are able to just smile and go with the flow, as they say, are the ones that are the best swimmers. Good swimmers are not people who know how to fight the current. They know how to go with the flow, how to know when to let go, and not fight when the current is against you, the tide is going against your way. Good swimmers know how to navigate. That's the key, to navigate. And navigation is not about control. Navigation is learning how to take what comes your way and have the resilience to know how to use it, either to, at that point, to not resist and not fight, or to go to, when the tide goes your way, to use it as a springboard to move forward. So it's really about navigation, as opposed to fighting for what you want or what you don't want, or against what you don't want in your life. So Esther, the name itself, implies and connotes the idea of a concealed hand. But the interesting thing, like I said with Esther before, haster, astir, it's a double concealment. What's the significance of a double concealment? So here the plot thickens. It's difficult enough that we don't see the secret to the hidden story in our lives. The problem is there's a second concealment that conceals the first concealment. The way the Baal Shem Tov puts it, he says there are things that we are concealed, but you know at least something is hidden there. You know that you're in the dark. But what happens if there's a darkness that conceals the fact that it's dark, and you can convince yourself that it's actually light, which of course complicates matters tremendously, because now you don't even know that it's dark. You may think that you have it all clear, when in truth you don't begin to you're clueless. So there's a concealment that hides a concealment. In modern day psychology, you can call it denial. Denial means you don't even feel there's a problem. When you don't know there's a problem, you don't even begin to search for a solution. So some of us know there's a problem, at least. I don't know what the solution is. Some of us don't even know there's a problem. And that, of course, amplifies the problem, because, as we say, knowledge, awareness of a problem is half the cure. If a person is denial, that the point they don't even feel that there's an issue, where do you begin? They're not going to look for help. So the concealment that we live through in this world is often doubled, if not tripled, to the point we don't even know. Many people who think everything is going fine could be completely delusional when things are not fine at all. And it's maybe too painful or too uncomfortable to acknowledge that. So the solution to that is not necessarily some type of shock treatment or a jolt to the system where a person is an assault on your perspective. It always comes down to a sensitive approach, because if you see someone that's a friend of yours that doesn't even know they've got a problem, the key is not to try to just shake them out of it. You have to do it in a way where it allows a person the pride and to save face and the ability to be able to discover something on their own. Because if you challenge them, it sometimes makes things worse. So denial has its own purpose. Remember, there's a reason that we have a denial in our system, because denial, what it does is, it protects. When a person is in a very sensitive place, sometimes it's just too much of a shock, too much trauma to just accept that there's a problem. So there's a reason we go into denial. Denial is a problem when you become persistent and you continue and you just create and fabricate a whole new reality just to cover up the pain. But everyone has to have a certain element of denial, or else we wouldn't be able to survive. Certain trauma, certain challenges, death, losses that shock the system. It's important that a person have a certain minimizing the pain. But the key is to grow in a way that it does not destroy you, but allows you to slowly open your eyes. If someone's living in the dark for too long, you don't just come out into the sunlight. It'll blind the person. So you have to acclimate yourself and do this slowly. So the story of Purim captures all the above of a hidden choreography behind the scenes, of a hidden hand which is concealed, a story behind the story of all our lives, but also to the point that it can be a double concealment. But when we allow ourselves the ability to look deeper and to acknowledge that there's something deeper, that's when your story of your life begins to emerge. And I'm going to make some suggestions how we do that, but I just wanted to lay out the general story of Esther. So to go deeper, what is the enigma? Why is this an enigma? An enigma is whenever you find there's a contradiction or something that seems to be inconsistent, creates what we call an enigma, a paradox. So how many of us see ourselves as walking paradoxes? Would you consider yourself a paradox? Well, we are paradoxes. Paradox means that we're full of contradictions. There are times we're convinced, our minds tell us one thing, and we do something else. Has that ever happened to you? You know that your mind is telling you this, and this is what's right, and still you do something that is contradictory. We are able to make promises and break them. Make promises to ourselves. We're filled with contradictions. We have many voices tugging at us. You can begin your day with one plan, and then something seduces you or distracts you, and you're off to something else. We're not machines. We're constantly wavering, and we have many different distractions. And there's nothing per se bad about that. You say, welcome to the club. If you think you're a paradox, that's exactly the way life is meant to be. It's meant to be a paradox. The question is whether it's out of control or not. That's another story. But that we're full of paradoxes is a common thing. The mere fact that we have a reflective mind and we have an impulsive heart, and if they're both active in your life, there has to be contradictions. They will conflict with each other. The heart tells you one thing, your mind tells you another. We have conflicts, we have different responsibilities. You have responsibilities at work, you have responsibilities at home. You only have 24 hours in the day. Everyone's competing for your time. So there's going to be constant conflicts and tensions that drive us in different directions. Then many of us have, talk a step deeper, go into your own psyche and your childhood. We all have more or less different complex relationships with our family members. And hopefully nobody has any complex, but there's always complexities. Our parents wield a lot of power over us when we're young and impressionable. That power continues to linger as we grow older. What do you do with that? Are you conforming? Are you able to be yourself? Do you even know what yourself is, what your own voice is? So the list goes on with a whole bunch of different forces at work. What is your voice? Do we know who we are outside and independent of society, family, our education? How much are we just following along a certain herd mentality because others have written that script, and it's more comfortable or easier to follow that. Just questioning that is also a source of conflict or tension. So paradox is a norm of life. It's a sign of a healthy person. It's a sign of an individual, or individuals, or a human being, who has many voices inside of us and many forces inside of us. If you use Kabbalistic terminology, we have in the spectrum of the human emotions, we have the 7 emotions that we discuss, especially after Passover, the counting of the Omer. If you're familiar with my book on the topic. So there's 7 times 7 emotions. And what do they begin with? The one begins with love, which is attraction. And the second one is discipline. So we're attracted to things and we're repelled by things. Chesed and Gvura are 2 polar opposites. Chesed means to give. Gvura is to withdraw. Chesed means to flow forward. Gvura withholds. Which means like the gas and the brakes. Sometimes people are giving too much. They have to know when to stop. Some people know how to stop. They don't know how to give. These again are 2 voices. How much should you give? I remember a question once that came to the table here in this class. Someone was talking about, what's our responsibility when you see a homeless person? You know? And you know that the money you give them may be used for something that is destructive. Drugs, alcohol, something else like that. What's the responsibility? So we had this whole discussion, playing devil's advocate. Not that we believe in the devil, but a matter of expression. And I said, okay, so let me ask you this. You see someone who's a pitiful soul lying in the street with a cup asking for money. So of course, if our hearts are sensitive, it goes out. You don't ask questions and you help the person. They may be a con artist, maybe they're not. But there's a certain emotional reaction that we have. And that can never be wrong. The emotional reaction doesn't mean you're doing the right thing, but it means emotionally at least. And what happens if a day goes by and you're in a bad mood and you walk by and you say, what are you lying here on the streets? We should get rid of all these homeless people. So suddenly you're not in the mood of giving. So then it becomes right not to. And let's go even further. If you're really compassionate, why don't you just invite that person home for dinner? Most people are not going to consider that. Dangerous. They don't want that person around me. So in other words, compassion based on our terms. So one has to wonder, what is compassion? Is it making you feel right, better? You feel good? Is that what it's about? Or what's right? And the Torah addresses this very, very in detail. What is right? What makes you feel right, or what is right? Maybe you should invite that person home. Maybe you should give them a loan. Maybe you should give them a job. But most of us don't want to get immersed to that extent. It's much easier to throw them a few coins. So I don't have a black and white answer for this question. The point I'm making here is it's far more complicated than just you feeling bad for somebody. Sometimes feeling bad for somebody actually should require that you don't stretch out your arm too quickly and help them grow. Maybe the discipline of helping them grow. Maybe that's what's required. So basically, Chesed and Gvura are just an example of 2 different forces, and both are necessary. It really is a balance. That's what we need to find. The same thing is Netzach and Hoid. Netzach is drive, ambition, endurance, and Hoid is yielding. When do you stand strong with your position? When do you yield? This is a big question in relationships, in personal disagreements, in many areas. When is yielding right and when is not yielding? Some people will show you that in certain situations if you yield, it's a sign of weakness. Some people will say standing strong is a sign of weakness and being obstinate, and maybe you should be more flexible. Again, these are just questions that many voices. So these are paradoxical challenges that we have all the time. So what is paradox fundamentally? I'll soon get to it in the root of it as it's discussed in the mystical teachings. A paradox fundamentally is when 2 forces are at work that don't jive, that are not aligned with each other. So it creates a certain type of tension, which per se, as we shall soon see, is not necessarily a bad thing. It gets complicated and far worse when the tension turns into anxiety and turns into a debilitating or a demoralizing force. But tension is the secret actually to all energy. Tension is what creates movement. Tension is what creates any positive, powerful force as a result of some tension. But we'll get back to that soon. So the idea of an enigma or a paradox is essentially 2 forces that are not at odds with each other, and therefore it creates a certain inconsistency. They're not aligned. So we could basically say, as soon as you have 2 human beings on earth, you already have a type of paradox, because two people don't have the same opinion. We're not clones of each other. So is diversity a bad thing? Even if diversity can lead to divisiveness, diversity, one clearly could argue, and the case is so, that diversity is a healthy thing. It would be like saying that all musical notes in a composition should sound the same way. What makes it music is precisely because it's diverse, and combined in the right harmony, it creates beautiful music. One musical note can only be a nice sound at best. One color can only be a nice color. But beauty is harmony within diversity, precisely where there's room for dissent and dissonance. And divisiveness, when you're able to combine different forces and all aligned in a certain direction, then you have beauty, then you have harmony. Take the human body, take nature, all forces that are extremely opposite of one another. No one would ever imagine, if you did not know how it works in the one body, that the circulatory system and the nervous system and the muscular system and the neurological system, they all work in different rules. They're fed, they're nourished in different ways. Some have to close down for another one to function. And yet when they come together in a healthy organism, they create unbelievable beauty. So the element of enigma is actually the secret of all life. Yes, for simple minds, if we want control, we'd like everything to be just aligned, all the eggs all lined up the same way, exactly the same. But nothing in life is exactly the same. And in a way, in our modern technological world, a lot of people think that if we can just align things up and file them properly and turn them into an organized system, then everything will be fine. It's actually the people who find happiness in life are not the ones that try to get control over it, are the ones that just let go and realize that the diversity of life is more powerful than our need for getting it all figured out. You won't figure it out. The mystery is too great. There's too many mysteries involved. So I would say the status quo, the natural status of life is far more paradox, is far more natural than order. And I didn't say chaos, I said paradox. Because paradox is what drives diversity. It means many, many different forces. Another way to put it is, as soon as you have a dissonance between a ratio, you can say, a dissonance, a disconnect between potential and actuality, there you got yourself the ultimate paradox as well. How much potential do you have inside of you right now? Who knows? How can we even know? How much of your potential has been actualized? You can also equally not answer. If you don't know what potential you have, how could you know how much percentage has been actualized? You can know what you've done, but you don't know how much more there is to be done. So right there you have yourself a mystery that you'll probably never solve in your life, resolve. How much potential do you have? Instead, what we do is we try to succeed in the areas that we have familiarity with, but most of ourselves remains a mystery. So the story of Esther and her name actually is the story of each one of us. We are walking enigmas. We are walking concealed entities. What we have inside is concealed. And to the point, sometimes doubly concealed. Concealed to the extent you don't even know that you don't know. So there are people that know that they don't know, and there are people that don't even know that they don't know. And that is the ultimate concealment. But to explain it now in the context of, you mind opening the window maybe there? Everybody out in there. The second one, the other one. The root of it all, and to understand it well, we go back to the words of the Arizal that I've cited many times in this class. It's a Kabbalistic concept, but it's not. It initially sounds mystical and maybe esoteric, but in truth, it's really a great way of looking at the root of every issue. One of the beautiful things about Torah in general, specifically the Pnimis Torah, the inner dimension of Torah, again, the inner, is that it gets to the root of an issue and not just the symptoms. Often we deal with things on a symptomatic level. You look at something, here's how it's behaving, you try to understand the cause of this behavior. Usually the causes that you can identify are also part of the symptoms. The real root cause is far more complicated, because you have to travel all the way inward to realize what is the beginning, where did it all begin. So in Kabbalistic language, the Arizal, Isaac Luria, writes or he didn't actually write it, his student Rab Chaim Vital wrote it in a classic work of his called Eitz Chaim. He's maybe the greatest Kabbalist of all time, the Arizal. Tzfat, he lived in Tzfat his last year or two of his life. And the statement he makes is that in the beginning, this is the cryptic statement, that in the beginning, meaning conceptual beginning, divine energy filled all of existence, which means filled all of whatever would become existence, divine energy. But as long as that divine energy was all-encompassing and all-pervasive, there was no room for any other reality to emerge. And God, therefore, created what he calls the Tzimtzum Harishon, the great Tzimtzum Hagadol, the great contraction or the great concealment, essentially a black hole. He says he withdrew and concealed energy, leaving space now, an empty space, a black hole, for existence to emerge, for an independent reality to emerge. And then he continues and explains, and in this dark space, a narrow thread of light, or a kavachut, a thread, a line, like think of it like a laser beam, like a stylus, that entered into this dark hole, and it began to shape existence as we know it. This is the Arizal's description. The interesting thing is that this has not just captivated the imagination of mystics, but also poets and artists who relate to this vision of reality. As you decompose or deconstruct existence, this is what the core existence looks like. Some people will describe the core existence as a dark space. Today, in modern physics, one of the new discoveries of the last decade was that the largest amount of space in all the solar systems is what they call dark matter. Dark matter. 90% of existence is dark matter. Very consistent with this statement. So it's like a dark backdrop upon which the cosmic artist paints existence as we know it. In the words of the Arizal, in other words, existence is defined by concealment, not by revelation. We see we see only a very small percentage of reality, basically. The status quo, the norm, is darkness, not light. And this is true in our lives. Look in our lives. If someone say to you, "Can tell me who you are?" It's shrouded your psyche, your unconscious. By definition, unconscious. It's shrouded in an unconscious state. You're not conscious of it. So the deepest things in life are something we're not aware of. Shrouded in darkness. Look at this earth, the globe that we live in. No one's ever traveled to the center of the earth. But scientists tell us that the center of the earth is burning hot lava that would destroy anything that comes in its path. That's the center of this earth. Temperatures that are unimaginable. And it's concealed in a crust, and we see it walk around on the face of the earth. Yeah, we're aware of volcanoes, once in a while eruptions of earthquakes, that tell us that there's something going on beneath. But we live on the surface level, and we think this is reality. Reality, in truth, is completely concealed from us. What we see is the tip of the iceberg, the pin of a needle. To use an example that I've often used, and I say this also, but I wanted to dedicate the class tonight to two souls that left this earth this week, both on Sunday. One, Betzalel ben Fred, an uncle of mine, and another, a brother-in-law, Shaya ben Rasha. So the question people ask is, where does the soul go to upon death? A big question everyone asks. Where does the soul go? Everyone asks that question. And years ago, when I was asked this question, it immediately struck me that the question itself is based on a false premise, a false assumption. What is the assumption? The assumption is we are where it's at, and we wonder where the soul goes to. Where did you get that assumption? How do you know you're where it's at? Based on what? Based on your own empirical observation? How much do we really see or know about where we're at? Just as an aside, the classic analogy given by, who is it? It was Sir William Eddington, one of the physicists, philosophers of in the middle of the 20th century. We're now in the 21st century, so we talk about the 20th century, the middle of the 20th century. Where he was asked the question that quantum mechanics, the new physics, was coming up with all these bizarre conclusions that were completely counterintuitive to classical physics, Newtonian physics. Ideas of states of improbability, as they call them, the uncertainty principle, a whole bunch of statements and ideas that were very inconsistent with logic and definitely with the physics as it was known till then. And no one ever seen an atom, he was asked. No, let alone subatomic particles. How do we come to all these bizarre conclusions? And they were bizarre. The physicists themselves considered them bizarre. They called them all weird science, it was called, even today, because it was completely defied the laws of normal logic. But it was proven again and again and again, impossible to deny. Today these are realities, not only realities, technologies would not be possible today were it not result of many of these quantum mechanics, including the microchip, cellular technology, and so on. And he gave a very classic analogy of a fisherman that spread his net across all the seas of the earth, 7 seas, and gathered up all the fish he was able to gather, and then documented them. Different color fish, different species, different names, different sizes. And after documenting them all, he came up with this brilliant conclusion that he was going to announce to the scientific community. Conclusion was there are no fish in the sea that are shorter than a half-inch long. That was his big revelation. Because he had not one fish that was shorter than a half-inch. All the fish he caught, that was the only thing he was able to find a common element. There were so many diverse fish, but nothing shorter than a half-inch. Until his little daughter, like the emperor with no clothes, reminded him and said, let's see the net you used to capture these fish. And she looked at the net, yes, and the net had spaces of a half-inch wide spaces. So you can imagine all the fish that were shorter than a half-inch fell back into the sea. So was he right or wrong? The answer is he was right. He just should have qualified and said, when you use a net that has half-inch spaces, you're never going to catch fish that are shorter than a half-inch long. That's all he needed to say. So his conclusion was right, but his instrument was flawed. Or he should have qualified it. So this physicist said the example, he says, yes, when you use empirical tools, sensory tools, our eyes cannot see love. Does that mean there's no love? Our eyes can't see ideas either. So eyes, ears, taste, touch, and smell are tools that are, let's say, a half-inch wide. They see things that are half-inch or larger, or smaller. Then there are realities in life that those tools won't work. You need other tools. You need a microscope or a telescope. And then there are realities that even those instruments won't work, and you need a different type of instrument. So it's not that because you can't see doesn't mean that it's not there. It means what instruments are you carrying? So to go back to the question, where does the soul go to? I'm where it's at. What instruments are you using to determine where a soul goes to? So I always answer the question with a somewhat of a weird, or what do you want to call it, bizarre or ridiculous. Ridiculous is the best word. Analogy. Imagine an imaginary dialogue between a refrigerator and electricity. And the refrigerator arrogantly says to the electricity, where do you go after they pull the plug? Where do you go? And the electricity, of course, responds to the refrigerator, what do you mean, where I go? What kind of chutzpah? What nerve do you have to ask me this question? I was always around. I go back to where I always was, unconfined by your little box. They just invented you a few years ago. You refrigerate food, and now you think you're the center of the universe. And you ask where I go? I go back to a place that transcends time and space, that is not confined in a box. And you'll never understand it because all you know is your little box. And anyone who hears this response, even whether a believer or non-believer, immediately, of course, that's exactly the same question. Where does the soul go to upon death? Where was the soul before it came here? We're a little box on earth. We have a small perspective on time and space. And we think this is it. The soul simply goes back to where the souls are. No different than electricity. It goes back to where electricity is. It doesn't actually go back. It just ceases to be confined in the terms and in time and space as we know it. That's really the issue at hand. So with that said, it makes you think, okay, so how much do we really know about anything? What do we know? Now, this is not dismissing all the human mind and brain and all the innovations and all the scientific breakthroughs and medical and so on and so forth, and all that human beings from beginning of time have innovated. It just tells us that everything we've done is all within the box. And whatever we know, there's a far more that's concealed. And there's nothing wrong with that. As a matter of fact, it's the driving mystery that really allows human innovation by realizing that innovation comes from a far greater mysterious place than we can imagine. Where do ideas come from? Einstein writes about his own ideas. He says, I have no idea where they came from. Sitting, a thought comes into your mind, a dream, an imagination. Imagine something crazy, and then suddenly it gives you an idea, and that idea can be a new theory. That alone, just that process is a mysterious process. But either it's due to our insecurity, I'm not really sure how to identify it, or it's due to our own narrow space, or maybe our pride, we think we've got to be right. We think we need control. So we think we need control, we need to understand, I own these ideas. We don't own any ideas, because these ideas are just a little figment, a little, as I said, tip of the iceberg of far greater reality. So one word, Esther, tells you that whole story. It tells you most of it is concealed. And not only is it concealed, it conceals the fact that it's concealed, which is even more humbling. And that's not meant to knock us, it's meant to give us a true picture of reality. I would rather someone have told me that there's a mystery, a mystique to existence, and someone tells me you can figure it all out. Who is it that said, someone sent me an email recently, I don't know, it was Rabbi Nachman or one of the people that said, I'd rather not understand God than have a God that thinks like me. Would most of you concur with that? You know? Now, this is even with our egos and even with our confidence and thinking we're great thinkers. I think still we'd rather have a God that's mysterious than a God that thinks like me. You know? Like when someone says, what would you do if you were God? You'd do exactly what God did. If you were God, you'd be God. You wouldn't be you. But that type of letting go, that type of, let's call it, celebration of our vulnerability is terrifying to us, because we're little children that are fearful. That's what it comes down to. No doubt that if you grew up in a home and your parents gave you confidence that you can take on anything and that you had no fear, what would be the problem? Why should life not be mysterious? What's wrong with the mystery? Mystery is terrifying for people who are afraid of losing control. But you look at little children, they're complete explorers. Everything for them is mystique. Everything. And they just grab it at the opportunity, and that's how life is. They see everything as magical. They can just take a little nothing that we just dismiss and just study it for hours and hours. The problem becomes when we adults teach them to become like us. So what happens is the mystery is lost. I heard that talk, I don't know if any of you heard the TED talk from this British psychologist, educational psychologist. Brilliant talk. And I just was thinking about it, how it applies to the Jewish world. But basically he makes the case, like one of these 17-minute talks, which I know, the 7-second attention span of our times, but seemingly 17 minutes seems to work for some reason. So he makes the case that the entire Western educational system is built on something Napoleon and Ferdinand the Great established a few hundred years ago, all in order to create efficient soldiers. They wanted powerful armies. Until this day, the education system is impacted by their curriculum, which is why it's called elementary school, because elementary is a military term. They basically focused the major subjects were all about creating efficiency. Mathematics, history, science, things like the creative arts all became extracurricular things. That's what you do as a hobby. That's not natural. The natural thing is the sciences, efficiency, a good tool chest, because that's how you create efficient business people, efficient accountants, efficient doctors. Not to take away from some value in that, but they eliminated. What he says is that children are naturally artists, are naturally creative, they're natural dreamers, and they're natural imagination. That's what they use most, before they learn any tool chest. And what we do is we turn them into technicians and tell them that imagination and dreaming and fantasizing is not realistic. Now, obviously, you need a combination, but he makes a very interesting case. And the truth is, in Judaism, you have two parts of the Torah. You have the inner Torah, you have the outer Torah. The outer Torah is mechanical. It's the mechanics, what Shabbos is, when it begins, what are the laws of Shabbos, what are you supposed to do, what are you not allowed to do, 39 types of work not to do. And those 39 break down into detail. It's detail after detail of mechanics. Then there's the Primis Torah that the Zohar calls the soul of the Torah. Soul of the Torah is about creativity, about spirit, about the energy within, not the mechanics alone. Mechanics alone is like a body without a soul. Given a spirit or the soul of something is a soul without a body. We live in a material world. We need both. And unfortunately we find this dichotomy, you have either one or the other. You don't find many people who have really mastered a good combination of both. Purim is the story of the inside story, the story of the soul within our lives. And that's why it begins with this Megillah Esther. Megillah means a scroll. A scroll, if you want to say a mysterious scroll, you can call Megillah Esther. A secretive scroll, because Esther comes from the word haster. A scroll that's concealed, which is really the story of our lives. Our lives is a scroll that's concealed. Not just at the moment we were born, we had no idea what our life is going to unfold into, but also today. What comes tomorrow? Where is the bigger picture emerging? We may have little glimpses of it here and there, but hardly do we know the entire picture. And actually the goal is not necessarily to know the entire picture. It's to know that you don't know the entire picture. That's already the beginning. And then when you do that, you suddenly realize that there are dots that when you connect them, a bigger picture does emerge. And it's a miraculous picture. It's one story of redemption. The problem is we become our own worst enemy because we try to control. We try to control the dots. We try to control what is going on because it makes us feel secure. The truth is it doesn't do anything about security. It just gives you the illusion that you right now feel like you're on top of things. And the story of Esther is really understanding and appreciating, celebrating that vulnerability, celebrating that mystique, and celebrating the power that it contains. And it's actually quite freeing to know that. One of the things we say, Ein simcha ka'ataras hasfekus. It means there's no joy as the one of resolving doubts. And you've ever had a doubt, like, and you're toying with it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then one morning you wake up and say, I got it. There's a certain deep, profound contentment, satisfaction in that. Because you're no longer plagued by doubt. Even if you went one direction that maybe you weren't so happy with, but the clarity, at least now I can put it to rest, and let's move on. But doubts have that ability to create this. It's like a poison. It's a poison that poisons our clarity. What does it do? It paralyzes you. Doubt paralyzes a person. Clarity, even if it's no or yes, creates a certain freeing. But there's something even greater than resolving doubts, and that is embracing the mystique of something. It's also a resolution. Imagine you come to discover that certain questions will not be answered. No matter what you do, they will never be answered in your life. And all you can do is make a choice based on what you know and live with it. And be at peace with the fact you will not get an answer to this mysterious question. That too is a very powerful, peaceful place. Because instead of expending so much energy on something you're not going to get an answer to, you're suddenly able to just enjoy the experience for what it is, and then you realize certain things emerge. Love, by the way, is one of the key things that benefit from this type of approach. Obviously, we do whatever is possible to find a person, a mate, a soulmate in our lives, partner. But there is a mystery to the whole thing. And as long as you don't let go and allow that mystery to take hold, you will be disappointed. There's no way that it cannot be. Because it's not something, love owns you, you can't own it. And the only way you can allow it to own it is by allowing it to emerge. And knowing there are mysteries. There are mysteries about other people. And there may be things you'll never know about another person. But still, that doesn't mean you can't trust them. That doesn't mean you can't find the right person for you. You don't have to understand everything about another person to know you can trust them. That's good maybe for transparency in business. You want to know the whole track record of a partner that you're going into business with. But if you want to really embrace the psyche, the soul of another human being, part of embracing is know that there's a mystery to every human being. What you want to know, obviously, is things that you want to obviously to find out that you can trust this person. You want to know that you have a true partner with you that can resolve issues, even ones you can't anticipate today. But to really understand another person completely, as a matter of fact, there's a very deep piece to know you can't. Some parts you could, some parts you can't. But the mind has also become an overrated tool. It's one of the ways that we insecure people use to control. I can understand other people. When you're smarter than someone else, you can manipulate them. And you can cover up your manipulation so they'll never know. And you have the ability to see things that they do not see. People find that to be a comforting element. But that does not create love. That may create a little security for an insecure person. It's not even true security. But love means that you're able to embrace a mystery. That's really what it comes down to. There are parts you know about a person, those parts you love, you care about, you find there's trust there. And then there's a whole world that most of it you'll never understand. You don't even understand yourself. How are you going to understand your partner? If you want to put it that way. Really understand ourselves. But we also think we understand ourselves because, again, going back to the Tzimtzum, we think we know more than we really do. When we know very little, what do we know about our souls? What do we know about our psyches? I mean, you don't need life and death to realize the mystery. But what is the force that gives us life? What is lurking behind the conscious mind? Do we really know? So smart people understand there's something there, but the smartest people of all realize that what they don't know is perfectly fine. That's also part of intelligence, is to know there's a whole dimension that's fundamentally unknowable. Which is why on Purim, actually, one of the mitzvahs is adila yada, to come to a place beyond knowing, a place where you really transcend knowledge. This doesn't mean a place of letting go and being stupid and suspending your intelligence. It doesn't mean faith. It means to know the unknowable. So there's an expression that says, "Tachas ha'idiyah shalei neda." The ultimate knowing is to know that you don't know. But that is the literal interpretation. There's a deeper interpretation, and that is to know that which you don't know. Not to know that you don't know, but to know the unknowable. So you'll say, how is that possible? That sounds like a contradiction. You want a paradox? That's a paradox, right? Does any of you relate to the statement? To know the unknowable? It seems paradoxical. But I'll demonstrate to you how it's not at all if you really think about it. You see, let's put it this way. Knowledge, in general, works like this. Before you know something, you don't know it, right? That's pretty obvious. Then you learn something. What exactly happens from the point of ignorance to awareness? Or I would say awareness, maybe not the right word. Ignorance and information. Is that either you've received some information, some data you didn't know, and now you know. Or you've processed something in your mind that now allows you to appreciate or understand something you didn't understand. So basically, what we call in the simple English, there's a subject and an object. Right? You're the subject, the person, you're the knower, or the non-knower, and now here's an object, you're trying to understand this object. And now there's two worlds here, the subject and the object, and you're trying to relate it. So knowledge essentially seemingly sounds like a duality. There's you, the knower, and the thing you know. But then there are experiences in life where you experience something. How do you compare experience to knowledge? You can read about something in a book and never have tasted it. Yet the writer is so descriptive that it resonates with you. It's as if you were there. I mean, this happens all the time. We read things that we were not there, but the writer is able to convey the sentiment, the emotion, as if you were there. Now, let's say you actually go there and you experience it. What's the difference? What happened when you experienced it that did not happen when you read about it? And we're talking about the best possible writer, and you're the best possible reader. And it was conveyed to you in the most accurate way, yet you did not experience it yet. It's pretty hard to actually describe what the additional ingredient is. Let's take music. Someone writes, they heard the most beautiful music, and it touched them and transported them to another place. You're not hearing the music. You're reading the writer who heard the music is describing his experience, or her experience. So we can relate it because we once heard music that way. But Even if we didn't, we can relate it because the writer is communicating the idea very well. Then you go ahead and you turn on that music that person wrote about, and you hear it yourself. It's a whole different world. What changed? So the way the Hasidic masters put it is like this. What changed is, knowledge is about subject and an object. The subject understands the object, but there's still two forces. Experience is where the subject melts into the object and you become one. You're no longer reading about it or hearing about it, no longer understanding it, you are it. It's a state of being. You can read about love, you can even experience love, but it's a whole different thing of the state of being love. Not being in love, being love itself. You can talk about water and submerging yourself in water, but what is the difference between a fish in water and a human being that walks into the water? A fish is water. Or what does water get wet? Let's put it that way. Dry things get wet. So we live in a world of duality, and knowledge is also controlled by that duality, that we know things outside of us, but we're not it yet. When you experience it, what happens is, and this is why das, in Hebrew, the word das, means intimacy. It's actually the word used for sexuality. It's used for the union between a man and a woman is considered to be called intimacy. Das. They knew each other. Adam and Chav knew each other. What's knowledge? Because knowledge is experience, and experience is becoming the thing, not just being aware of it. So knowledge is becoming it. What is that? How does that play into our discussion here? To know the unknowable is not possible in a subject and object, because if I don't know it, I don't know. How could I know the unknowable? But you can experience the unknowable, and the experience is deeper than logic. When you experience it, then you suddenly don't have these questions. In other words, the paradox is a problem in the world of logic, the mathematical world of logic, but it's not a problem in the world of experience. We can experience something and it doesn't bother us, and you know it even more than you would have read about it. And this is the ultimate experience. So when it says that a person can come to know the unknowable, what's happening is that due to letting go of your logic, you're able to experience something that no way that a regular machine called a computer would have ever related to. A computer can only relate to a knowledge that's outside of itself, and we have the ability to experience. So I don't know if I'm articulating it fully into the proper way, because it's somewhat of maybe abstract to some of you, maybe to all of you, maybe to me too, but hey, maybe this is an experience of the unknowable. And it's probably impossible to fully describe unless you've had an experience of it. And that's true as well. So when you experience something of real beauty, experience, not read about it, you experience it, there is an element that is unknowable. And look, ourselves in our own skin, in our own bodies, we're stuck with ourselves. You can't do anything about that. And most of us is unknowable. We don't have a problem with that because you have no option. But we have a problem when we don't know something outside of us, because again, we want control. With ourselves, fine. We forgive ourselves for our paradoxes. We forgive ourselves for our transgressions, so to speak. But the fact is that unknowable is far more real than what we know. The amount we know about something is far less, in other words, than the things we don't know about it. But the beauty is that the unknowable is really far more real, which is why anything that is, as I said earlier, a true, real experience is going to be less tangible and harder to grasp. And the best example, I've used this example very often, is think about our ways of expressing ourselves. It comes to talk about things that are superficial, like the weather, like sports, like anything that is very not intimate. You'll find words and words and words galore, endless. Just open up talk radio and you see what they talk about. We can talk about it forever. Someone asks you to talk about yourself, you'll find very few words. And initially we think the reason for that is, I'm uncomfortable to talk about myself, I don't trust. Why would I speak about myself? It's easy to speak about superficial things. But it's not the case, because even if you trusted someone, even to yourself, very hard to talk about your innermost self. Question is why? Why is it easier to express things that are seemingly so external? I can talk about this table, we can analyze it, its color, and so on. Talk a little about your inner psyche. You're going to find far harder ways, far more difficult to express yourself, your inner feelings. And again, not out of fear. The reason is very simple. Words are containers, and containers are limited. How much can you pour into a container depends on the size of the container. Being that it's limited words, they can only contain that much energy in them, that many ideas. That's why we create a language called metaphor. Metaphor widens and broadens, expands the containers, and that can now contain a metaphor, a poem, a song, a riddle, a turn of phrase, can express something that regular conventional language would not be able to express. And then there are, even metaphor, there are such intimate feelings that metaphor won't work either. And then we need sometimes just a word. An oy vey can capture more than volumes. A sigh, a laugh, just one sound. And then, to go even further, there are such intimate feelings that even a sound won't work. It's total silence. In the painful side, people who are terrible shock, of terrible trauma, that moment they can't even cry. A cry is too much. Because the intensity of the feeling is so much that nothing can contain it. There's no expression. When you begin to express, you're already showing that there's the energy has somewhat subsided. The same thing in the positive way. The deepest experiences really have no expression. Now, we still try to express the inexpressible, and the fact is actually we can. But you first have to let go of the power of expression, and then you can come back and tell about it. If you think you can just, I'm just going to express the inexpressible, it doesn't work that way. You need a whole different type of experience. When Moses says to God, I want to see your face, God says, no man can see my face and live. And God says, I will show you my back, but my face I will not let you, but my face you will not see. So the question is asked, 3 questions are asked. Why does God have to rub it in? He already told him no man can see my face and live. He has to say, I'll show you my back, which means only a reflection of me, not my real essence, my core. He doesn't have to add, my face you won't see. He already said that. Secondly, Moses was a wise man. He didn't understand you can't see God's face and live. If you see God's face, you are God. And finally, why document this story? If he was rejected, that's it. Why tell us a story that didn't end up being? Moses didn't get what he wanted anyway. What's the point? So the way the last verse is really interpreted is unbelievable interpretation. It goes like this: God said to Moses, "I'll show you my back and my face, but my face you'll see by not looking at it." That's the way it's meant to be read. There are things we can see directly, and there are things we can only see indirectly. There are things, the only way you can own it is if you let go. And there are other things you can own if you hold on to. The intimate, the deepest, is the only way to go there is by letting go completely. And when you do, you can know the unknowable. This is not the first time that's been stated. I can tell you this right now. This is a core of mysticism, not just Jewish mysticism, many mystical schools of thought. But in Judaism, it's a fundamental principle because it tells us the power of humility, of bittul, is not a power of weakness. It's the greatest strength of all. The strength of allowing yourself to enter a place that your conventional tools and tools of expression cannot enter there. That's what God was saying. You want to go like you and stay, use or remain yourself? That's not going to work. It's not going to be on your terms. When you're ready to let go of your terms, you'll be able to see it precisely because you stopped looking. And that is a critical lesson in life. Not everybody's ready perhaps to embrace it, but I can tell you right now, this is the secret for the greatest people achieving where they achieve. Now, we like the reward. We want the reward without the effort, but the effort is the key. You cannot enter certain places unless there's certain things you let go. It's just not possible. Not because anyone was being cruel, because you yourself are using tools that will not let you go there. Like I mentioned before with a fisherman. A net of a half-inch space, is simply cannot capture fish that are small. If that's going to be your tool, then you're going to be stuck with fish that are longer than a half-inch long. The same thing is with the other experiences. To experience the states, the sublime states I'm describing right now, which is really the inner you need to have more refined tools. There's no way around it. You can't use your existing tools and expect to see things that those tools simply cannot contain. So it's really about learning a new language. And that's why Purim doesn't mention the name of God. It doesn't mention, everything is in a concealed form. It tells you that things happen over time. It's not that type of, like Passover is a revealed miracle. The Jews were delivered from Egypt. God's hand was revealed. The far deepest miracles are the ones that are much more natural than meets the eye. They're not natural, they just appear natural. Here's the interesting thing. The Baal Shem Tov says, the difference between a natural event and a miracle is one thing, frequency. If the sun were to rise once in our lifetime, everyone would say it's a miracle. But since it happens every morning, hey, we get used to it. Another way to put it, the Chacham Tzvi puts it this way. He says that nature is simply a bunch of miracles happening one after the next. You don't even notice it because it becomes so common. Tell me, we breathe, right? We're all breathing right now, I would assume. Is breathing a miracle or not a miracle? So you say, well, so many people are breathing. There's 7 billion people breathing now, and they're breathing something like 18 breaths a minute, which adds up to whatever amount of breaths a day. We did the calculation once here, and without effort, and so on. Figure out. Go ahead and check tonight on Google. What is the process of breathing? What does it require? How many different elements have to work for you to breathe? One breath. You go to a hospital, God forbid, and you see someone struggling to breathe, you suddenly realize, hey, 1 second, this isn't just a common thing. We just are very callous human beings. We get used to things. It's not a novelty for us. Our health is not a novelty. We take it for granted, as if it's a given. And even though in our minds we know that it's not, and we know people age and there's health issues and so on, we pray for good health, and everyone should only have good health always. However, it's perpetual miracles that are happening so often that we don't even see it. The Alter Rebbe says a fascinating thing in Tanya. He says the word teva, nature, is a word we use for anything we don't understand. We just call that's nature. But tell me, what is nature? What does the word nature mean? Think about that. When someone says it's natural, the sun rises, it's natural. What does that mean? They're basically saying because it happens every day. That's what they mean. So since when is a mystery less mystery because it happens every day? It tells us about us. It's more of a statement about us than about the sun rising. It's not about the sun being natural. It's that we just get used to things. And our fickle personalities like novelties. We want excitement. We want fireworks. So the most uncommon thing are the common things. Seeing the supernatural and the natural is the greatest miracle of all. From time to time, the mystics explain there's an actual miracle because we are shallow people and we sometimes just need to be shaken out of our reverie and our complacency. But the greatest miracle is the Purim one, because that's the real story of our lives. It's the story of the magic of your life. Every second is a magical moment. Children naturally sense it until we beat it out of them. And then now we are looking for special things to happen. Special things are happening all the time. But you don't even know it. Because we're busy living on the pin of a needle, or as the Kabbalists put it, the klipa. Like when you're living on the shell, like on the potato peel, you don't even realize there's a fruit inside. And we look for these new special things going on. So Purim is exactly that. It's a celebration of a paradox. It's a celebration of concealment, and recognizing that the greatest forces are the ones that we don't see with our eye, we don't discern. But when you recognize that, that's when you begin to know the unknowable. And really what it comes down to is that the unknowable is far more, actually, much deeper knowledge than what we think we know. What we know is what we call, like I said before, the refrigerator thinks it knows where it's at. Is that knowledge? Or it's knowing that I don't understand electricity because I'm a little box and I'll never get it. Which one is more knowledgeable? The refrigerator that's convinced its box is the reality, or the one that acknowledges there's something beyond the box? So initially it seems, what do you mean? Knowing is what I know. I know the box. That's all I know. No, knowing the unknowable means you realize there's something bigger, and then slowly you come to realize that's far more real than what I have right here. And at some point that becomes far more reality, and what you thought you knew is not real knowledge. It's somewhat, you could say, maybe limited knowledge. Some say consciousness is actually a state of ignorance. The unconscious is far more real. State of consciousness is the small little part that you can identify with. So how real is that? No, it's like one little thing. It's like the tip of the iceberg. So you see the tip of the iceberg, you can study it and say, wow, I know it. No, what you know is very little. When you really know it, when you know that under that tip is a whole iceberg that's far greater than you'll ever see. And you may say, well, I'll never really directly see it. You know what? The more you acknowledge its presence, the more you begin to see it, because you're not trying to see it. You're not trying to own it. So Purim is that type of letting go, the adala yada, beyond, let's call it, the doors of perception, in the words of William Blake. Beyond the doors of perception are limited knowledge. We have limited awareness. So what we call wisdom, what we call understanding, is really limited awareness. That's what it really is. And true awareness is something that is behind the door, that we can sense and sometimes relate to, but not something we are comfortable dwelling all the time. People who are truly in a healthy love have a taste of it or experience it. People who are godly human beings, soulful people, have experience of it. The rest of us living on the material side of the world and trying to, what they say is, we're not physical beings having a spiritual experience, we're spiritual beings having a physical experience. There's the difference. Which one are you? Which is real? Now most of us are physical beings, at best having a spiritual experience from time to time. And even that, more or less on your terms, on the hours that works in your schedule. But the other way around is a far different experience, and it's almost frightening actually, because it means I have to then rethink my whole reality. Well, so what? That's what Purim is about. It's turning everything upside down. That which you thought was inside is really outside. That which you thought was outside is really inside. So what? So you lived on the level of the glove, now you realize there's a hand inside the glove. The fact that we convinced ourselves that the glove is more important than the hand is our own limited perception. So I hope this doesn't, if I'm getting through to you, I hope this doesn't disturb anybody's perception. If I'm not getting through, then I guess there's nothing to be concerned about. So that's that we'll never know, I guess, or you'll let me know. But I know when I first heard or studied these matters, it was very exhilarating to me, because it resonated. Though I didn't get it, it resonated, and it was far more appealing because it sounded much more real. But at the same time, I could see very well it could be very disruptive in a way if you really relate to it, because then you start saying to yourself, so everything I do, and I'm invested in, all the things I think are so important, happen to maybe be completely insignificant. If you come to that conclusion, I can tell you you're in the right direction, you're going in the right direction. But there's a price to pay, and the beautiful thing to say is this, that the price does not mean you have to suddenly transform everything. This doesn't mean you suddenly have to throw out everything you know and start from scratch. This can be done step by step, and it should be done step by step. And the point, however, is that you have to be ready to go on the journey. Now, we all have tastes in our experiences in life that have, as I said, a glimpse of this type of reality. These are magical moments. These are moments when we fell in love, moments when we may have had a child, moments of other really awesome, humbling experiences. I'm not talking about anything that made you bigger and greater in your own eyes. I mean the opposite. Where you stood in awe of something that's beyond you. Those are glimpses. But to be able to maintain a life that is in constant awe is a whole different story. And it's something that really is absolutely doable, but it requires a rethinking, actually a realigning, not just defragmentation, but like erasing your hard drive and starting fresh. But as I said, it can be done step by step by step. It doesn't have to be done overnight. So Purim is an opportunity that allows us to recognize that there is Esther, haster, concealment, and concealment within concealment. And in turn, that itself is the first step of the sense of truth. And this is a rule across the board. When you're ready to see something greater, you need to empty what you have right now. If you don't, you remain that refrigerator. It's convinced that it knows where it's at. It is where it's at. It's its box. You may be comfortable with that, but then you have to remember that was exactly what that's your expectations. That's what you're going to get. You're going to get what you write your own script, so to speak. So hopefully this Purim, starting tomorrow morning, from Tainus Esther, this is a fast of Esther, which is why I chose to talk about it this evening. And this year, because Purim is Sunday, usually the fast of Esther is the day before Purim. But because Shabbos is before Purim, so we don't fast. So we do, Thursday is the Tainus Esther, Friday is also going into Shabbos, and Purim is literally 3 days later. Friday, Thursday, Friday, Shabbos, Sunday. So we have more time to think about these things. So that way you can't no excuse. You say you signed up for it and then regret it. Here you have 4 days to think about it. So to go to the Tainus Esther, which maybe is one of the reasons we fast. Fasting is one of those symbolic elements where we let go of what we're accustomed to, which is our meals, what we like, and you're aware of another reality that is not fed to you by physical food. And then that opens us up to Purim, which is actually not meant to be non-fast day. It's a day of celebration, and a festive meal is eaten. You're not supposed to fast on Purim. So Purim is going back into your reality. It's a material day. It's a day you can work on that day. You can handle money. It's not like Shabbat, a holy day, in that sense. But its holiness lies again in its mystery. So Shabbat, you have holiness is open, apparent. And Purim, again, it's in a concealed form that we're back into seemingly the regular life. But at the same time, it's a transformative day that has the power to transform a life, like just like the Jewish people experienced then. But Napachu, it says that there was a month that entirely transformed from miyogin, from pain and disaster and what's the word for it? And oppression, turned to a day of celebration. They say Laihudim Haisa Erev Simcha V'Sasin V'Yakar, celebration and joy and beauty and respect and honor and dignity. So may God bless us all to learn this lesson from Esther, Astir. We all have the Esther within us, men and women, which is that there's much more concealed than is revealed. They say megilah tefach, you reveal 1 inch, but 2 inches are concealed. That is the true sign of a healthy human being, that there's a mystique. So it's true, there's a feminine mystique compared to a flower. Every petal you open up, there's other petals beneath it. But there's also a masculine mystique. Hopefully some can embrace that as well. And that is that there is a mystery to the human psyche. But mystery should not frighten us, because mystery doesn't mean as a mystery like, a detective story, a mystery that I don't know the answer to, let me find out the answer. No, a mystery means embracing that the limited tools of our knowledge are not the final arbiter and decision maker of what is reality. That's what it comes down to. And embracing that is really embracing God and embracing truth. So as I said, may we all be blessed to have the strength and courage to free ourselves from our fears and insecurities and all the other reasons we need to hoard and hold on to for our dear lives, to our defense mechanisms, or we may call them offensive mechanisms, but at the end of the day they're just protectors, and actually experience something beyond that you've ever experienced. So that's my blessing to everyone here. May it be a Purim that is liberating in that way, and then we can compare notes next Wednesday about how we've done. And with that said, I also welcome anyone to engage me if you wish, or see me as a resource on Meaningful Life Center in any way we can help you in this journey of the knowing the unknowable and embracing it and finding it in your life in which way, and as well as any other way that I can be helpful to you, or our staff can be, Velvel and all our good friends and team. And finally, I want to wish everyone, of course, a happy Purim this Sunday, and hopefully you can find a place to hear the Megillah on Saturday night and Sunday morning, as well as the other mitzvot, which is to send several gifts, food gifts to friends and colleagues, and charity matanos lavyanim, and of course partake in a festive meal. If anybody needs assistance in any of these matters, again, let us know. We hopefully can help you. And then, of course, as they say, Magula Legula, from Purim we come to Passover a month later, literally 1 month, 30 days later is Passover. So we Jews always have one holiday coming right after the other. So that has its own message, which we'll address. Now, we don't mix Simcha with Simcha. Ein Ma'arvim Simcha b'Simcha. This is now the Purim celebration, and then we'll discuss the Passover one when the time comes. Yes, and Philip, my dear friend Philip and colleague, will be giving his class tomorrow night, Thursday night, 7 p.m. If you want more information, contact us or our office, Belleville, right? And again, I want to say these classes in honor of two special souls that went back to their place beyond time and space as we know it, beyond our box here, which is sad because we wanted to be connected, the box, with beyond the box, but at the same time, the reality is souls are with us no matter what. So this is the spirit and merit, as I said, of my uncle, my father's younger brother, Betzalel ben Freda, and my dear brother-in-law, Yeshaya ben Rasha. And all of us should only celebrate good occasions, souls within bodies, but not forget that the box is not where it's at. And remember that it's the transcendent spirit that is reality, even as we are here on this earth. And ultimately is the fusion of expressing the inexpressible and connecting the transcendent with the immanent. Thank you very much, everyone.